They say success is the sweetest revenge. But no one tells you how lonely it feels when the person you once loved becomes the ghost haunting your victories. He said I'd never make it without him. He laughed when I cried, called my dreams foolish, my efforts worthless. And for years, I believed him, until the day I decided to stop proving myself to him and started proving myself to me. What he didn't know was that every cruel word he spoke became fuel for my fire. And when I finally rose, my success didn't just silence him, it destroyed him. This is the story of how his arrogance became his punishment, and how I learned that revenge sometimes wears the mask of triumph. But before I continue, make sure you're subscribed to the Revenge by Sophia channel and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. We love to see how far our stories travel. The rain had stopped hours ago, but the city still glimmered under the wet streetlights. She sat by her small apartment window, sketching designs on torn paper, her dreams bigger than the walls surrounding her. Every night she whispered promises to herself, "One day I'll make it." The hum of traffic outside mixed with the clicking of her pencil, a quiet symphony of hope and hunger. She worked 2 jobs, slept 4 hours, and still found time to dream. But as her eyes grew heavy, she never noticed the darkness that had started to watch her from afar. A man who smiled too perfectly, who spoke too sweetly, and who saw her light as something he could own. And that night, as the city sighed in sleep, fate prepared its cruelest introduction yet. He appeared like a blessing she didn't ask for, confident, warm, his words wrapped in honey and lies. They met at a cafe, her sketches scattered across the table, his gaze fixed not on her art, but on her. "You've got talent," he said, his voice calm, smooth. "But talent needs someone to guide it." She smiled shyly, unaware that guidance from the wrong person can lead straight into a trap. Days turned into weeks. His presence became her comfort. He made her laugh, brought her coffee, listened to her dreams as if they were his own. But sometimes, when she spoke of independence, his smile tightened. His eyes went cold, and though she ignored it, a whisper deep inside her wondered, why did his love feel so heavy? He started calling her his girl, a phrase that felt sweet at first, until it became a cage. He told her she was wasting her potential by working alone. "With me," he said, "you'll go further than you ever dreamed." He helped her move into a new apartment, one he paid for, insisting it was for her comfort. But soon she realized comfort came with conditions. He wanted to know who she met, where she went, what she wore. The freedom she once held in her trembling hands began slipping away, one invisible thread at a time. And though she smiled through the unease, her heart knew something wasn't right. That night, as she stared into the mirror, she barely recognized the reflection staring back. Bright eyes dimmed, voice softened, spirit slowly fading. And somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled again, almost like a warning she failed to hear. At first, it felt like love. Constant calls, surprise visits, his arms always around her. But soon the warmth began to suffocate. Every time she tried to meet an old friend, he'd frown, saying, "They don't really care about you. I'm the only one who does." He convinced her to quit her evening job, saying he could take care of her now. The phone that once buzzed with messages fell silent. Invitations stopped coming. Laughter faded from her world. Days blended into nights inside their apartment. His music, his rules, his moods. She told herself this was love, sacrifice, devotion, partnership. But one night, staring at her reflection in the darkened window, she whispered a question she couldn't ignore anymore. When did love start feeling like prison? He had mastered control. Not through shouting, but through quiet correction. When she spoke too loudly, his look silenced her. When she dreamed too big, his smirk reminded her of her place. He started reading her messages, deleting contacts he called distractions. Even her laughter began to sound foreign, cautious, measured, fearful. Sometimes she tried to defend herself. "I just want to work on my art," she'd say softly. But his voice, calm yet sharp, would slice through the air. "I told you, you don't need to prove anything. You have me." And in those words, She felt both comfort and chains, as if love had turned into a leash she could never remove. Every morning she woke up beside him, but it felt like waking up inside a cage lined with velvet. Weeks turned into months, and her dreams, once bright, began to rot under the weight of his control. Her sketchbook lay unopened for days. Dust gathered on her desk, just as silence gathered in her chest. He started mocking her small achievements. "You think drawing pays bills?" He'd laugh, tossing her papers aside. The laughter hurt more than shouting, because it made her feel foolish for ever believing she could be more. She stopped arguing, stopped trying, stopped dreaming. But deep inside, a faint pulse of rebellion still beat, weak but alive. Sometimes in the middle of the night, she'd stare at the ceiling and whisper to herself, "He can't own my soul. Not forever." Yet every dawn, she'd wake up to the sound of his footsteps, and that fragile voice inside her would grow a little quieter. The mornings grew heavy, filled with silence thick enough to choke on. Her sketchbook, once her escape, now sat untouched on the shelf, its pages curled from neglect. When she picked up her pencil one night, he walked in, smirking. "Still wasting time on that?" he said, snatching the page and tearing it in half. The sound of paper ripping felt louder than thunder. She tried to smile, whispering, "It's just a hobby," but her eyes betrayed her pain. He leaned close, his voice soft but sharp. "You'll thank me one day." "I'm saving you from disappointment." And though she nodded, her hands trembled under the table, because deep down she knew he wasn't saving her. He was destroying her, one dream at a time. That night, when she lay in bed beside him, her tears fell quietly, as if even crying out loud would betray her rebellion. She started hiding her emotions behind silence. It was safer that way. He'd ask questions just to test her tone. "You seem distant. Are you upset with me?" If she hesitated, his jaw tightened. If she spoke too calmly, he accused her of lying. So she learned the rhythm of his moods, when to smile, when to stay quiet, when to disappear into the background. He had turned her into an echo of herself. When friends called, he'd listen nearby. When she laughed, he'd ask who she was laughing for. And slowly, she forgot what it felt like to be genuine. Her reflection became a stranger, one who looked obedient but hollow. Every time he said, "You'd be nothing without me," she forced a smile. But inside, something small and fierce whispered, "We'll see." One evening, she walked past the mirror and froze. Her face was pale, her eyes dull, but it wasn't just exhaustion. It was the reflection of someone erased. The apartment felt colder that night. His laughter from the next room echoed like a threat. She sat on the floor, her hands gripping the torn pages of her old sketches, her breath trembling. And for the first time in months, she felt anger, sharp, electric, alive. She realized that the man who claimed to love her had built his strength from her weakness. And though fear still chained her, something inside had finally cracked, not in despair, but in defiance. Her tears dried under the dim light, and a thought flickered through her mind like a secret flame. If he can break me this easily, then maybe I can break free. The storm that night came without warning, thunder shaking the windows, rain clawing at the glass. He was in the living room laughing loudly with his friends, their voices slurred with drink and arrogance. She stood in the kitchen, washing dishes, pretending not to listen. But their words carried, cruel, careless, familiar. "Man, you really tamed her," one of them said, followed by laughter. He smirked, replying, "She was wild once. Thought she could make it without me. Now, she barely speaks." Each word hit her harder than any slap could. She froze, dish in hand, her reflection warped in the metal sink, a ghost of the woman she used to be. And in that moment, as their laughter echoed through the house, something inside her finally died. The illusion that he loved her. When the guests left and silence returned, she sat in the dark, staring at the flickering candle on the table. His words replayed in her mind over and over, like a cruel lullaby she couldn't escape. He walked in, half drunk, still smiling. "Why are you sitting here like a statue?" he asked. Her lips trembled, but her voice came out steady. "You told them you broke me." He paused, eyes narrowing, then laughed coldly. "Don't be so dramatic. You take everything too seriously." She wanted to scream, to throw the candle, to make him feel even a fraction of her pain. But she didn't. Instead, she smiled faintly and whispered, "You're right." Because something darker than rage had entered her heart. Calm, deliberate silence. The kind that comes right before the storm inside finally explodes. That night she couldn't sleep. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing through every insult, every broken promise, every dream he had stolen. And slowly, realization bloomed. He didn't own her. He only controlled the version of her that believed his lies. The real her, the girl who once dreamed by the window, was still buried somewhere beneath the pane. When the first light of dawn slipped through the curtains, she made a silent vow. No one would ever break her again. No one would ever decide what she could or couldn't be. She looked at him sleeping beside her, peaceful, unaware that the woman beside him was no longer the same. And as the morning sun touched her face, she whispered to herself, "This ends soon." Her fear was still there. But now, it was standing next to something stronger, resolve. Days passed like whispers, calm on the surface, but beneath it, something had changed. She began waking earlier than him, using the quiet hours before dawn to think, to plan, to breathe again. She found her old laptop hidden under the bed, the one she once used to sketch designs and apply for small jobs. The screen flickered to life, a ghost from her past reawakening. Her hands trembled as she opened a blank page. The sound of the keys clicking in the silence felt almost forbidden, yet sacred. Every word, every design, every small movement felt like rebellion. It wasn't much, but it was hers. And as the sun began to rise, she closed the laptop quietly and whispered, "He won't take this from me, too." For the first time in years, she felt a spark, small but alive. Her nights became her sanctuary. While he slept beside her, she would sit at the table with her laptop's glow lighting her face, learning, writing, creating. She applied for freelance work under a new name, hiding her identity behind digital walls. Each completed project gave her a jolt of power, a taste of the independence she once lost. When payments started to come in, she hid the money, little by little, inside the lining of an old handbag. It wasn't just about earning, it was about becoming again. Sometimes she'd glance at him sleeping and think, "You taught me how to survive in silence. Now watch me escape in silence too." But with every small victory came the same haunting question. What will he do when he finds out? She became an actress in her own life. Around him, she laughed, agreed, obeyed, every movement calculated to keep suspicion low. He thought she was finally fixed, unaware that every gentle smile was a lie, every touch a distraction. When he bragged to his friends about how calm she'd become, she sat quietly, hiding the storm building behind her eyes. But her heart raced every time he looked too closely, every time his tone changed. She knew how quickly his calm could turn violent. Still, she didn't stop. Couldn't stop! Because for the first time, fear was no longer stronger than her purpose. She told herself, "Let him think I'm his. The longer he believes that, the safer my freedom becomes." And somewhere deep inside, she began to smile again, not out of love, but out of defiance. The days felt heavier, but her nights were alive with quiet electricity. Behind the locked door of her small study corner, she worked tirelessly, her fingers dancing across the keyboard, her heartbeat racing with every message sent. Clients praised her skills, her ideas, her discipline. They didn't know her name, only the pseudonym she created, Evelyn Gray. Each email of approval felt like oxygen-filling lungs long starved of air. Her first big payment came on a cold Friday night, just enough to remind her she wasn't powerless. She stared at the screen, tears gathering in her eyes, whispering, "You said I couldn't do it, and here I am." But in the silence of her small victory, she didn't hear the faint creak of the floorboards outside the door, or the shadow that paused just long enough to listen. The next morning, His tone was different, calm but sharp-edged. "You've been staying up late lately," he said, sipping his coffee without looking at her. Her heart skipped, but she smiled softly. "Just couldn't sleep." He studied her face, then nodded slowly. "You're not hiding anything from me, right?" His voice was light, but the threat underneath it was ice cold. She shook her head, pretending to laugh. "What would I even hide?" He didn't reply. He just leaned in, kissed her forehead, and whispered, "Good, because lies ruin everything." The air felt colder after he left. Her hands trembled as she reached for her laptop again, not from fear, but from realization. He was starting to feel it, the shift in power. And nothing scared a manipulator more than losing control. She began working even more carefully. Every file had a password. Every trace of Evelyn Gray hidden deep within encrypted folders. She cleared her browser history nightly, deleted her emails after sending, and worked with headphones on, not to hear music, but to mask her heartbeat. Her projects grew, more clients, more income. Her mind was alive again, sharper than ever before. But with every success came a shadow of danger. He had begun watching her differently, quiet, observant, suspicious. One night, as she shut her laptop and turned off the light, she caught her reflection in the window, smiling, confident, defiant. It scared her for a second. How much she looked alive again. And in the darkness, a whisper escaped her lips. "You'll never see it coming." Outside, the wind howled against the glass, as if warning her that freedom always comes at a price. He came home earlier than usual, quiet, expressionless, the kind of silence that felt like a storm about to break. She was at the table pretending to read, but her hands shook slightly, betraying her calm. He dropped his keys, leaned on the counter, and said softly, "So, who's Evelyn?" The sound of that name sliced through her chest like a blade. Her mind raced. He found something. Maybe a message she forgot to delete. Maybe a receipt. She couldn't tell. She looked up, forcing confusion. "What do you mean?" He stared at her for a long time, then smiled. The kind of smile that didn't reach the eyes. "Don't play dumb with me." The room fell silent. Even the clock on the wall seemed to stop ticking. She could feel her heartbeat in her throat, pounding against the truth she couldn't afford to speak. "Answer me," he whispered, stepping closer, his breath heavy with suspicion and control. She looked up at him slowly, summoning a calm she didn't feel. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice trembling just enough to sound afraid, not defiant. He slammed his hand on the table, making her flinch. "I know you've been hiding something. Staying up late, locking doors, lying to me." Tears welled up in her eyes, not out of fear, but out of fury that she had to pretend once again. "I just couldn't sleep," she murmured. "I've been restless, that's all." He stared for a moment longer, breathing hard, then stepped back, running a hand through his hair. "If I ever find out you're lying to me, you'll regret it." He turned and walked toward the bedroom, leaving her alone in the dim light. She sat there for a long time, her pulse loud in her ears, every nerve burning with anger and adrenaline. And though fear still gripped her, a single thought began to echo louder than her heartbeat. "I have to leave, soon." That night, she didn't sleep at all. She packed a small bag quietly, just essentials, her laptop, the little cash she'd hidden in her handbag. She sat by the window staring at the dark city, thinking of the years she had lost behind locked doors and broken promises. Every sound, the hum of traffic, the rustle of the curtain, felt like a countdown. When the first light touched the horizon, she glanced at him sleeping peacefully, unaware that she was already gone in her mind. Her eyes burned, but not from tears, from focus. She whispered softly, "Thank you for teaching me how to survive pain. I'll need that where I'm going." Outside, the morning wind carried the scent of rain, the same way it had the night she met him. Only this time she wasn't the same girl waiting for love. She was a woman planning her freedom. The night before she left felt endless. Every tick of the clock was louder than usual, like time itself was daring her to hesitate. He slept soundly beside her, his hand resting possessively on her waist, his breath slow and steady. She stared at the ceiling, barely breathing, afraid that even her thoughts could wake him. At 3:17 a.m., she slowly slid his hand away, inch by inch, until she could move freely. The floorboards creaked beneath her bare feet as she reached for the small bag she'd hidden under the bed. Her heart pounded like a drum, not from fear of being caught, but from the sheer weight of freedom waiting on the other side of the door. She paused for one last glance at him, the man who had once felt like safety, now nothing more than a cage. And then, with trembling hands, she turned the doorknob and stepped into the silence of her new beginning. The streets were empty, washed in pale moonlight and mist. She walked quickly, her footsteps echoing softly against the wet pavement. Every shadow felt alive, every distant sound made her flinch, as if the city itself knew she was running. She didn't have a destination, only a direction, a way. Her bus ticket was crumpled in her hand, its edges damp with sweat. When she boarded, she sat by the window, staring out at the blur of streetlights, feeling both fragile and infinite. Her phone buzzed with a message from him. Just one word, where? She turned it off without replying and dropped it into her bag. As the bus rumbled into the dark highway, she whispered to herself, "He'll wake up to an empty house, and a ghost he'll never control again." She arrived in a new city before sunrise, gray skies, unfamiliar streets, and the smell of rain clinging to the air. There was no one waiting for her, no plan, no certainty, just the trembling freedom she'd fought so hard for. She rented a single room in a cheap guest house, its peeling walls and creaky floor somehow comforting. She opened her laptop on the small wooden desk and stared at the glowing screen. For a long moment she hesitated, afraid that even success might remind her of him. Then she typed slowly, "To all my clients, Evelyn Gray is back." The sound of that first sent message echoed like a heartbeat. It wasn't just work, it was resurrection. And as the morning sun finally broke through the clouds, she smiled through her tears. Because for the first time in years, she was finally herself again. The first few months were quiet, painfully quiet. Evelyn spent her mornings freelancing from her tiny room, her afternoons studying, and her nights lying awake, wondering if he still thought about her. But slowly, her routine turned into rhythm, her fear into focus. She redesigned her old portfolio, this time under a new name, Evelyn Gray. Every client she gained felt like a small rebellion against the man who said she couldn't survive without him. Her first paycheck came one rainy afternoon, small but honest. She stared at it for minutes before smiling through tears. "This," she whispered, "is mine." The sound of rain against the window seemed to applaud her. For the first time in years, her silence wasn't fear. It was peace. But beneath that peace, a question lingered. What happens when he finds out? Months turned into a year. Evelyn's name began to circulate in small business circles. Her designs were bold, emotional, unforgettable. Her clients called her the woman who understands pain, and they weren't wrong. Behind every logo, every campaign, every late-night creation, there was a story, a scar, a piece of her reclaiming control. She rented her own studio, filled it with soft light, white curtains, and the scent of lavender, everything he once forbade. Her laughter returned, her eyes brightened, her voice found melody again. But then one morning an email arrived. Subject, "Are you the same Evelyn?" Her hands froze above the keyboard as she opened it. A familiar name stared back at her. It was one of his business partners. And in that moment, her calm world trembled. The message was polite. Too polite. "Your work reminds me of someone I once knew," it read. "A woman who disappeared years ago." She felt her pulse quicken, her throat tighten. She replied carefully, "You must be mistaken. I'm new in this field." But that night she couldn't sleep. She stared at her reflection in the mirror. Same eyes, same fire, but a new name. Still, the thought haunted her. What if he knows? She began locking her doors again, keeping her curtains closed, listening for footsteps that weren't there. The city felt smaller, the nights longer. And even as her business grew, a shadow from the past was quietly finding its way back to her. Evelyn's work spread like wildfire. A major brand featured her designs on national television, calling her a voice of strength in modern art. Her phone wouldn't stop ringing. Her inbox overflowed, interviews, collaborations, magazine requests. The same woman who once counted coins for groceries now had her face on billboards. She smiled for the cameras, but inside she felt a strange chill, as if someone somewhere was watching too closely. Late one evening, as she scrolled through a sea of congratulations, one message froze her heart. It came from an anonymous account. "Didn't he say you'd never make it?" Her hands trembled. No one but him had said those words to her. And as the world applauded her rise, the ghost she thought she'd buried began to move. 3 days later, she received another email. This time, no mask. His name shone clearly in the sender's line. "Evelyn," it began. Or should I say, "the woman who ran away?" Her stomach turned cold. The email continued. "I've been watching your work. Impressive. I told you you had potential. You just needed me to unlock it." She could almost hear his voice, calm and venomous, sliding between the lines. He ended with one final sentence. "Let's talk. It's time you came home." She stared at the screen until her vision blurred. Part of her wanted to delete it and pretend it never existed. But another part, the stronger part, whispered, "Not this time." For years, she ran. But now, maybe it was time he felt what fear really was. The next morning, she woke with purpose. She stood before the mirror, no longer trembling, but calm, dangerously calm. She opened her laptop, traced her fingers across his name in her inbox, and smiled faintly. "I don't need to hide anymore," she murmured. Then she began to research his company, his partners, his finances. What she found made her pulse quicken. Corruption, forged deals, stolen money. He wasn't just cruel. He was criminal. And as she stared at the evidence glowing on her screen, she realized something chilling. Fate had handed her the perfect weapon. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about revenge. Evelyn sat at her desk long after midnight, surrounded by notes, files, and glowing monitors. His face stared back at her from a dozen open tabs: business interviews, luxury events, charity galas. He looked untouchable, confident, powerful. But she saw what others couldn't, the lies hiding beneath that polished smile. She traced the timeline of his company's growth, every deal he'd signed since she left. It didn't take long to find the rot: falsified invoices, fake charities, unpaid taxes. She printed everything, one sheet after another, until the air smelled like hot paper and ink. "This isn't revenge," she whispered. "It's justice." But deep down, she knew justice and revenge often wear the same face. Over the next few weeks, Evelyn became a ghost inside his empire. She used fake names, burner accounts, and anonymous emails to contact his partners and suppliers. With surgical precision, she exposed one lie after another. A missing fund here, a broken deal there. Within a month, rumors began to spread. His investors started pulling out. Projects stalled. Clients vanished without explanation. At night, she watched the news quietly, the cracks forming in his perfect image. Each headline felt like a small victory, yet she never smiled. She remembered too well the nights he'd humiliated her, the words that cut deeper than bruises. Now those same words echoed in her mind, but this time they sounded like fuel. One evening, she received a message from an old mutual contact. "Have you seen him lately? He's falling apart." Evelyn opened her laptop, found a new photo of him, eyes sunken, suit wrinkled, standing outside a courthouse. He looked smaller, weaker, almost human again. For a brief moment, she felt something she hadn't expected: pity. But then she remembered the nights of fear, the years he stole, and the silence he forced her into. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and whispered, "We're not done yet." Because for her, the fall wasn't enough. She wanted him to feel what she had: helpless, powerless, forgotten. And that part of her, the one that used to be afraid, had now become unstoppable. It was a gray morning when she sent the email. Short, simple, precise. We need to talk. Café lunares non. She knew he'd come. He was too arrogant not to. As she waited in the quiet cafe, the sound of the espresso machine and soft jazz barely calmed her racing pulse. Outside, rain tapped against the window like a metronome counting down the seconds. Then the door opened, and there he was. He looked older, heavier, eyes sharp but tired. When their eyes met, he froze. For a long moment, neither spoke, just silence, heavy with ghosts of everything unsaid. Finally, he smiled, the same cruel smile she once mistook for love. Still dramatic, I see, he said softly. And Evelyn smiled back. You taught me well. They sat opposite each other, a small table between two different worlds. He tried to talk casually, about business, about old times, about how she'd always had potential, but she wasn't the girl who used to shrink beneath his tone. Her voice was calm, steady, cutting through his words like glass. You told me I'd never make it without you, she said. But look at me now, and look at you. His smirk faltered. She slid an envelope across the table. Inside were the documents, proof of his fraud, theft, and deceit. I could destroy you in a single email, she whispered. But I'm giving you a choice. Might walk away from everything, or I'll let the world see who you really are. He laughed weakly, masking fear with arrogance. You don't have it in you. Her eyes narrowed. You don't know me anymore. The rain outside turned into a storm. Thunder echoed as he opened the envelope, flipping through each page, his hands trembling, his face draining of color. This could ruin me, he muttered. Evelyn leaned closer, her voice barely above a whisper. No, you ruined you. I just helped you see it. For the first time, his confidence cracked. The man who once controlled every moment now sat silent, small, defeated. She stood, placed a few bills on the table for her untouched coffee, and looked down at him. I used to think revenge would make me feel alive, she said softly. But it turns out, I already am. As she walked out into the rain, her reflection in the glass door merged with the storm outside, strong, unbroken, unstoppable. Behind her, he didn't follow. He just sat there, staring at the ruins of his own pride. Days after their meeting, the world began to whisper. Anonymous reports flooded the media. Tax fraud, fake donations, hidden accounts. Photos of him leaving offices under investigation appeared on every business page. He tried to deny it all, to call it slander, but the walls around him were collapsing faster than his excuses. Investors backed out. His name was blacklisted. His company stocks plummeted overnight. Evelyn watched from her quiet studio, sipping cold coffee, the faint hum of the city outside her window. She didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She simply watched, like someone watching the final scene of a movie she'd already seen too many times in her dreams. It was over, or so she thought, because revenge doesn't end when they fall. It ends when you stop hearing the echoes. Weeks passed. His face faded from headlines, replaced by newer scandals. But Evelyn couldn't sleep. Every night she'd wake up to the sound of rain and imagine his voice. Not cruel anymore, but broken. Sometimes she wondered if she went too far, if she became the thing she once hated. She opened her laptop and reread the last message he ever sent. You win. 2 words. Heavy, bitter, final. She closed the laptop slowly and whispered to herself, No, I just survived. But deep down, a quiet ache remained, the kind that even justice couldn't heal, because winning the war didn't erase the scars of the battlefield. One night, she stood before her mirror, same place she once stood before leaving him years ago. Only now, the reflection staring back wasn't afraid. Her eyes were sharp, her lips calm, her face carrying both victory and sorrow. She thought of everything, the years lost, the pain endured, the courage rebuilt. And for a moment, she wished she could tell her past self, You'll make it. You'll be free. You'll win. But it will cost you. Outside, thunder rolled again, a familiar echo from that first night of escape. She turned off the light, leaving only the moon to fill the room. For the first time in years, she wasn't running or fighting. She was simply existing. And that in itself felt like peace. Months passed. The chaos faded. Evelyn's studio was no longer a place of war. It had become a sanctuary. She spent her mornings painting again, creating not for clients, not for money, but for herself. Each brushstroke carried fragments of her story. Pain turned into color, fear into shape, silence into art. Sometimes she'd stop and just listen. The quiet hum of her space, the soft flutter of curtains, the faint laughter of children outside. It was strange how peace could feel so foreign at first, almost uncomfortable, like wearing clothes that didn't quite fit. But slowly she began to realize this was what freedom truly sounded like. Not applause, not revenge, just calm. One evening, she sat by her window with a pen and paper. The city lights glowed below, reflecting off the glass like constellations she could finally reach. She began to write. Not an email, not a statement, just a letter. It started simply, "I forgive you." Her hand trembled as she continued. "Not because you deserve it, but because I deserve peace." She wrote about the nights she cried, the fear she carried, the power she reclaimed. When she finished, she folded the paper carefully, placed it in an envelope and sealed it, but didn't address it. Then she walked to her balcony, lit a candle and burned it slowly. The ashes danced into the wind, disappearing into the night sky. It wasn't about him anymore. It was about letting go of everything that still tied her to the pain. Spring came quietly that year. The city bloomed and so did Evelyn. She opened a small art exhibition titled Unbroken. The gallery was filled with people who admired her work, unaware that every piece on those walls was born from survival. As she stood in front of one of her paintings, a reporter asked, "What inspired this collection?" Evelyn smiled softly and replied, "The belief that sometimes losing everything is the only way to find yourself." The crowd clapped gently, but she didn't need their applause anymore. She had built her peace from the ruins of her pain. And in that quiet moment, surrounded by art, light, and freedom, she realized she was finally free from him, from the past, from everything. One night, Evelyn returned to her old hometown. It wasn't planned. She just found herself driving aimlessly until familiar streets began to appear. The air smelled the same. The old corner store still flickered with its broken sign, and the house where she once lived stood unchanged, though the walls now belonged to strangers. She parked across the street and sat in silence. The windows glowed softly from the inside, shadows moving, a family laughing, living. She remembered standing by those same windows once, afraid to breathe too loud. Now she watched from the outside, free, unshaken. Her reflection in the car mirror stared back at her, older, calmer, whole. For the first time, she didn't see the victim. She saw the woman who survived her own story. The next morning, she stopped by the cafe where she once met him for that final confrontation. The same chair, the same corner, but this time she ordered her coffee with a smile. The barista didn't know her, didn't know the war that had once been fought here. She sat down, sipped her drink, and felt something strange. Gratitude. Gratitude for the pain that taught her resilience, for the fear that shaped her strength, for the man who unknowingly became her lesson. A soft song played in the background, something slow, familiar. And in that gentle music, she realized she no longer hated him. Hate was still a form of attachment, and she was done being attached to anything that once hurt her. She left her empty cup on the table and walked out, not looking back. As the sun began to set, Evelyn drove toward the horizon, the city fading behind her, the road stretching endlessly ahead. Her life had come full circle, but this time she wasn't running from anything. She was walking toward something new. The golden light spilled across her dashboard, soft and warm, like the world was quietly applauding her survival. She thought of all the versions of herself, the girl who believed his lies, the woman who escaped in the night, the survivor who rose from nothing. Each version had walked her here, to this peace, this freedom. She rolled down her window, letting the wind tangle her hair, her smile small but real. And somewhere deep inside, she whispered, "I made it, and I didn't need anyone to save me." Because her success was never about money or revenge. It was about reclaiming herself, and that, she finally understood, was the greatest victory of all. In the end, she didn't destroy him. Life did. All she did was rise, quietly and gracefully, until her light became too bright for his shadow to reach. He once said she'd never make it without him. But what he didn't realize was that she was never meant to walk beside him. She was meant to walk beyond him. Revenge didn't come with anger or chaos. It came in silence. In success, in freedom. And sometimes that's the most painful punishment of all. Because while he still looks back at what he lost, she's too busy walking toward everything she gained.